Democrats tell us they understand the world, but then they call climate change, not radical Islamic terrorism, the greatest threat to national security.
Ladies and gentlemen, we don't need a weatherman-in-chief. We need a commander-in-chief to run this country.
It has joined the list of Republicans' go-to jabs, the idea that climate change presents a global security threat. But a new report shows just how myopic that mockery really is, making an explicit link between climate change and war. A new study published yesterday finds climate change exacerbated the worst drought ever in modern Syria, aggravating social unrest in the country and helping to push it over the brink into civil war. Climate change led to crop failures, sending 1.5 million people migrating from farms to cities. Climate change pushed up food prices, aggravated poverty, and helped hasten the revolt against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And while it was not the only factor in a web of complex social and geopolitical pressures, according to Monday's report, the Syrian drought, worsened by climate change, was a key contributor in the ensuing 4 years of conflict. Conflict that has led to at least 210,000 deaths and forced more than 10 million people from their homes. In case there's any doubt about the source of that climate change and its devastating impact, the report's authors conclude, quote, human influences on the climate system are implicated, and furthermore, a drought of the severity and duration of the recent Syrian drought has become more than twice as likely as a consequence of human interference. In other words, the very real security threat posed by climate change is only going to get worse. Joining me now is co-founder and president of the Pacific Institute, Dr. Peter Gleick. Dr. Gleick, thank you so much for joining me. You know, the conclusions here are stunning, and yet many people have been writing on this, including you. How come the connection is not more publicly made between global security and climate change?
We are now beginning to make that connection. There's been a lot of debate in the past about the science of climate change. The truth is, in the scientific community, that debate is over. We know the climate's changing. We know that humans are responsible. And some of the most interesting research now is, what are the implications? What are the impacts of those changes that we're already seeing? And some of those impacts are going to be increasingly on things like national security and conflict. Through exactly the mechanisms that you describe, changes in water availability, changes in access to food, changes in political and economic situations that ultimately contribute, not cause, but influence the kinds of conflicts we see around the world. And that's what this paper suggests for Syria, that climate change caused by humans has influenced that conflict.
And indeed, the Pentagon issued a report concluding that climate change poses an immediate risk to national security. There is, in this report, they focus specifically on the Middle East as being particularly vulnerable to this kind of climate change influence conflict. Can you tell us a little bit more about why that region of the world is particularly susceptible?
Well, that's exactly right. It's a little ironic. The military has understood this risk and written about this risk for a long time. That's their job. They don't get into the debate about the science. Their job is to understand threats. The Middle East is a particularly vulnerable area, in part because it's extremely water short. It's already politically, for religious reasons, for ideological reasons, a volatile place. And so when climate change is imposed on top of those political, economic stresses, you get a greater risk of conflict. But we saw the impacts of climate change on Hurricane Sandy, which had a higher sea level rise than would have otherwise been experienced, and impacts on the California drought. The truth is, climate change is beginning to influence extreme events around the world, and in places that are vulnerable to conflict, it can sometimes be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
And indeed, parts of Central America, including Mexico, are also on that list, are they not?
Well, I would worry about any place where climate change affects economics, agricultural and food production, water availability, and where there are political tensions. It's that combination of the resource issues and the political or ideological problems that we better look at more carefully if we're interested in protecting our security.
It is a terrifying new reality, and it is upon us. Dr. Peter Gleick, thank you for your time.
Thank you.